They threw the rejected Omega to the monster in the woods. She touched him and Alpha King returned. The kingdom of Valder had long been ruled by strength, by order, and by fear. In its marble halls, Alphas stood tall, their presence demanding obedience. Omegas, soft and gentle, were seen as fragile, often dismissed, often overlooked. Among them was Elara, a young Omega whose spirit glowed brighter than most but whose body failed to fit the rigid expectations of her family. She had been born small, delicate in build, and though her mind was sharp and her heart brave, her family called her weak. They said she would never bring honor, never rise above obscurity. Her gentle ways, her ability to see truth and kindness in every soul, were nothing to them but flaws. And so, in the dead of night, when the wind carried a chill through the stone corridors of her family home, they decided she must be cast out. "You cannot remain here, Elara," her father had said, his voice cold as iron. "The kingdom will not forgive weakness. You are unworthy. You will not soil our name any longer." They did not speak of love. They did not speak of care, only of shame and duty. The guards led her to the edge of the forest, a place whispered to be cursed, where shadows moved like living creatures and no traveler returned unchanged. Her heart pounded as she stepped onto the moss-covered ground, the trees towering above her like silent sentinels. "Go," they commanded. "Let the woods decide your fate." Elara felt fear, yes, but she felt something stronger too, defiance. She had survived ridicule, she had survived neglect, and she would survive this. She drew in a deep breath, the mist curling around her like a ghostly embrace, and took her first steps into the forest. The air was thick and damp, filled with the scent of earth and decay. Strange sounds echoed in the distance, low growls, whispers of wind that almost seemed to speak. Every shadow looked alive, every branch a hand waiting to reach for her, and yet she walked forward. It was in the heart of the forest, near a small clearing bathed in faint silver moonlight, that she saw him. At first she thought it was a beast, a massive creature with fur as black as midnight, eyes like molten gold, and teeth that gleamed even in the dim light. His shoulders were broad, his claws long, and his presence carried a weight that made the ground beneath her feel smaller, almost trembling. But as she drew closer, she sensed something else, something that made her heart hesitate not with fear but with awe. There was a sadness in him, a loneliness so deep it echoed in the quiet around them. And though his form was monstrous, there was a faint glimmer, like a memory of the man he once had been. Elara's hands shook, but she did not step back. She had been cast out by her own blood, left to the cruelty of fate, and yet she did not run. She could not. She felt in the depth of her soul that this creature, this monster, was not evil, not truly. He was a soul like hers, broken and misunderstood. Slowly she lifted her hand, letting the light of the moon kiss her skin. It's okay," she whispered, her voice trembling but gentle. "I won't hurt you." The monster watched her, tilting his massive head, and a low growl rumbled from his throat. But it was not anger, it was curiosity, a cautious, fragile sound that carried centuries of sorrow. Elara stepped closer, her bare feet brushing the soft moss, until she was near enough to see the faint scars on his chest, the haunted depth of his eyes. Her fingers reached out almost instinctively, and when she touched him, a shiver ran through the forest. The creature stiffened, his claws digging into the ground, but he did not move away. The gold of his eyes seemed to shimmer, and for a brief, fleeting moment, Elara thought she saw a face beneath the monster, familiar, regal, human. You are not what they say," she breathed. "You are not a monster." The creature's chest heaved. A sound like a sigh, or perhaps a growl of relief, escaped him. Then, without warning, he moved. Not to attack, but to approach her, slow and deliberate, as if testing the fragile boundary between fear and trust. Elara's heart raced, not from terror but from a strange, unspoken connection. She stayed where she was, letting her hand rest lightly against his fur, feeling the warmth beneath the coarse exterior. The forest seemed to still, the wind holding its breath. Even the distant cries of night creatures softened. In that silent moment, the rejected Omega and the cursed king formed a fragile bond, a tether of empathy and courage. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time itself seemed to bend in the presence of such strange magic. The forest whispered secrets only they could hear, and the creature finally lowered himself to the ground, his immense form folding into the shadows like a king hiding behind a crown of thorns. Elara, despite her exhaustion and hunger, did not flee. She sat at the edge of the clearing, the mist curling around her like a protective shroud, and whispered stories of her life, stories of rejection, of longing, of dreams unfulfilled. She spoke of her fear and her hope, and she felt the creature listening, understanding, even responding in the subtle movements of his massive head, the flick of his ears, the slow swish of his tail. Night deepened, and the silver moon climbed higher. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and the wind rustled the leaves like soft applause. And then, the first signs of a strange, golden light shimmered across the creature's fur where her hand had rested. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but Elara noticed. Her breath caught. "What is happening to you?" she asked softly. The creature gave a low, resonant sound, almost a purr, almost a hum. The light pulsed gently, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. Elara realized, with a thrill she did not fully understand, that her touch, her empathy, her courage, her refusal to see him as a monster, had awakened something within him. Something old, something powerful, something human. She did not sleep that night, nor did the creature leave her side. They watched the moon together, silent companions in a world that had rejected them both. For the first time, Elara felt that being cast out was not the end, but a beginning. And for the first time, the creature seemed to remember himself, not as a monster but as a king trapped in shadow. Yet the forest was never still for long. Somewhere, deep among the twisted roots and gnarled trees, something stirred. A presence darker than any wolf, more cunning than any predator. Elara felt it first, a shiver that ran down her spine, a whisper that tickled her ear like cold breath. The creature stiffened beside her, growling low, a warning that her heart recognized even before her mind could. The light that had appeared beneath her hand flickered, weak against the rising darkness. She looked into the creature's golden eyes and saw a storm of conflict, fear, anger, sorrow, and something else. Something like memory. Before she could speak, the shadow moved closer, gliding through the underbrush with unnatural speed and silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the truth. The danger of the woods was not behind them, it was coming now. And though the creature stood before her, fierce and protective, she knew that their bond, fragile as it was, would soon be tested in ways neither of them had yet imagined. "Stay close," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "Whatever comes, stay close to me." The creature's ears twitched, and he stepped forward, placing himself between her and the advancing shadow. The golden light beneath her hand flared, brighter now, as if responding to their fear, their courage, their connection. But the darkness was patient, ancient, and clever. It would not be stopped by simple bravery or fleeting compassion. And then, from the depths of the forest, a sound that made the blood in her veins freeze. A deep, echoing growl, familiar yet more terrifying than the creature beside her. Something larger, older, hungering was awake. Elara's hand trembled as she reached out to the creature once more. "Whatever happens, we face it together," she vowed, though her voice shook with the weight of the unknown. The monster the king looked at her, eyes glinting with golden fire, and gave a low, resonant growl. Not of attack, but of promise. The light beneath her touch flared, and the shadows of the forest seemed to part, just enough to give them a chance to stand together. And in that moment, under the silver gaze of the moon, the rejected Omega and the cursed Alpha shared their first true bond, a spark of hope in a world that had abandoned them both. But even as they prepared for the darkness that approached, Neither could know what awaited them in the heart of the cursed woods, or whether the monster she had touched would survive the night, or finally remember the king he once was. The shadow at the edge of the clearing moved. With a slow, deliberate patience, slipping between the twisted roots and dense fog of the forest. Alara's heart pounded, but she did not pull away from the creature beside her. The golden light beneath her hand pulsed brighter, as if sensing the danger and trying to warn them. The monster, Kale, though she did not know his true name yet, stepped forward. His massive form shifted, and the light in his eyes flared like molten gold. He growled, low and deep, a sound that seemed to shake the very trees. The shadow hesitated as though recognizing his strength. Alara's voice was soft but firm. "We can face it, together." Kale glanced down at her, his gaze unreadable. Then, slowly, he lowered himself slightly, creating a protective wall with his massive body. The shadow moved again, faster now, and shapes began to emerge from the fog, creatures twisted and strange, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The forest was alive, testing them, drawing out their fears. Without thinking, Alara took a step forward. She could feel the fear clawing at her, whispering that she was not strong enough, not brave enough to face what lurked in these woods. But she felt something stronger too, the bond with Kale. She had touched him, awakened a spark in him, and she could not let that trust be broken. Kale moved with her, muscles coiled and ready, his enormous frame blocking the creatures from advancing. Every movement he made was precise, controlled, as though centuries of training and experience lay beneath the monstrous exterior. Yet, even in his form, there was something human in the way he lingered close to her, protective, careful. The creatures attacked. Shadows leapt from tree to tree, their claws scraping the trunks, their movements unnaturally quick. Kale lashed out, not with blind fury but with careful strength, scattering the attackers. Alara stayed close, her hand on his fur, feeling the tremors of his body as he fought. Then, almost as suddenly as they appeared, the creatures vanished, dissolving into the mist as if the forest had swallowed them whole. The clearing was silent again, except for the soft rustle of leaves and the pounding of Alara's heart. She looked up at Kale, awestruck, and whispered, You saved me." Kale's golden eyes softened slightly, but he said nothing. Words had never been his way, his power had always spoken through action. Alara realized that this creature, this monster, this cursed alpha, was both fierce and broken, strong yet afraid of his own past. Night deepened, and the forest seemed to breathe around them. The mist curled and shifted, forming shapes that teased the edge of vision, faces of forgotten kings, shadows of those lost to time, and whispers that seemed to speak directly to Kale. He stiffened at every sound, every movement, yet did not attack the illusions. Alara understood then. The forest was testing him, probing for weakness, for fear, for the king he had once been. "I know you are not a monster," she said softly, moving closer. "I know there is still you inside." Kale's eyes flared and a low growl escaped him, but it was different this time. It was not a warning or a threat. It was the echo of something human, something that had once commanded armies and ruled a kingdom. Alara's heart leapt. She had felt it, the first hint that the alpha within him was stirring. She wanted to speak more, to coax him out of the shadows, but the forest would not allow it. Shapes moved again, darker and more solid this time, forming a path that led deeper into the trees. The forest was alive, guiding them, forcing them forward. "We have to go," Kale growled, his voice rough but steady. "Follow me." Alara climbed onto his back without hesitation, her small frame making it easy. Kale moved like a shadow among shadows, silent and swift, every step measured. The forest seemed to recoil from him, acknowledging a power it had not felt in centuries. Yet the path was treacherous. Twisted roots threatened to trip him, thorned bushes tore at his fur, and unseen forces tugged at the edges of their courage. As they moved, Alara felt the bond between them grow. Each step was a silent conversation, each glance a question answered without words. She felt his fear, his longing, his anger at what had been stolen from him, and he felt her courage, her empathy, her refusal to see him only as a monster. Together, they were stronger than the shadows. Hours or perhaps only minutes passed, and they reached a small clearing where the moonlight fell in a silver pool. Kale lowered himself, and Alara slid from his back, kneeling beside him. He shifted, allowing her to touch his face, his hand, moments of trust that had been impossible before. "You are alive," she whispered, "not just in body but in heart, in soul." Kale growled softly, but it was a sound of acknowledgement. And for the first time, he allowed her to see the faintest glimmer of his human form beneath the beast. His jawline, strong and regal, his eyes golden and piercing, his posture noble even when covered in shadowed fur. He was not entirely lost to the curse. But the forest was patient. While they rested, Alara sensed another presence, closer this time, more deliberate. A creature not born of nature but of malice and cunning prowled the outer edges of the clearing. Its eyes glowed red and its gaze seemed to pierce through both Alara and Kale. "We are being watched," she said quietly, though Kale already knew. His ears twitched, his muscles coiled, every sense alert. The creature stepped into the moonlight, a wolf larger than any she had ever seen, its fur black as night, its teeth gleaming like polished stone. But there was intelligence in its eyes, cruel and ancient. It circled them, testing, waiting, and Kale growled low, a deep vibration that shook the earth beneath them. Alara touched his arm lightly, grounding him. "We face it together," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. She felt the spark beneath her hand pulse brighter, reacting to her words, her courage, her connection to him. Kale nodded, almost imperceptibly, and stepped forward to meet the challenge. The wolf lunged, and Kale met it mid-motion, not with rage but with control, his movements precise and devastatingly powerful. The golden light in his eyes flared, and the wolf hesitated, growling, before retreating into the shadows. Alara exhaled, relief and fear mingling. You are incredible," she said, awed. "Even like this, you are more than they ever said you could be." Kale looked at her, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He did not speak, but his eyes, golden, fierce, and human, held something she could not name. Respect, perhaps, trust, certainly, and something deeper, an echo of what he had lost and might yet regain. As dawn began to creep over the horizon, the mist fading into pale gold light, Alara and Kale rested in the clearing. She leaned against him, her small hand still resting on the warmth beneath his fur. He allowed it, the tension in his body softening ever so slightly. For a moment the world felt suspended, neither monster nor human, neither rejected nor cursed. Just two souls finding each other in a forest that had meant only fear and death. But the forest would not forgive weakness. A rustle in the distance, a sudden snap of a branch, reminded them that danger was never far. Something else moved in the shadows, unseen, patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. And Alara knew, even without speaking, that their trials were only beginning. The bond they had formed was fragile, like moonlight on water, beautiful, fleeting, but capable of reflection, capable of change. She sensed it pulsing beneath her hand, beneath the surface of Kale's golden eyes. And she knew that whatever lay ahead, whichever shadow, which trial their connection would guide them through. Alara rose, brushing leaves from her cloak. "We should move," she said, voice soft but determined. "We cannot stay in one place. The forest, it tests us. It wants us to falter." Kale inclined his massive head, understanding her words without explanation. Together, they stepped into the next stretch of the woods, moving deeper into the unknown, into trials that would demand trust, courage, and a bond stronger than either had known. And as the first light of dawn touched the canopy, Alara whispered almost to herself, "Whatever comes, I will not leave you. Not now, not ever." Kale's golden eyes met hers, steady and unblinking. In that moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the start of something neither fate nor curse could easily undo. The forest had grown darker, denser, as if the trees themselves were leaning closer, listening to the steps of Alara and Kale. Every branch seemed alive, every rustle whispering secrets only they could hear. The golden light beneath Alara's hand continued to pulse faintly, a heartbeat of hope in the shadowed woods. Kale moved silently beside her, though his massive form made the forest tremble with each step. The creatures that had tested them before were gone for now, but the air felt heavier, charged with a strange, ancient energy. Alara's stomach tightened as she realized the forest was no longer merely dangerous, it was aware, watching, judging, testing. "I can feel it," Alara whispered, clutching Kale's fur gently. "The forest, it's watching us. It's not just testing you, it's testing us, together." Kale's golden eyes flickered to her, his massive head tilting as if acknowledging the truth in her words. He made no sound, but his shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension in his body easing. Trust, even unspoken, had begun to take root. The forest opened into a narrow clearing where the ground sloped steeply down to a small river, its waters black and still, reflecting the silver moonlight above. A bridge of twisted vines stretched across the river, thin but strong, swaying slightly as the wind whispered through the trees. Kale stopped, sniffing the air, muscles coiled like springs. Alara slid down to the ground carefully, keeping her hand on his fur. "Do you think it's safe?" she asked. Kale's ears twitched. He lowered himself slightly to allow her to step onto the bridge. "Safe is a word the forest does not know," he said, his voice a low rumble, almost human in tone now. "But we must cross." The bridge swayed with every step, and Alara clutched Kale's massive paw, letting him guide her. Beneath them, the river shimmered with dark reflections that seemed to move like shadows. Faces appeared in the water, faces of kings, warriors, and creatures long dead. Alara froze, staring at her own reflection, distorted and small. "Do not look too long," Kale murmured, watching her carefully. "The river shows what is lost, what could be lost." Alara's hand trembled as she moved, but Kale's presence steadied her. Step by step, they crossed, feeling the weight of the forest's judgment pressing down on them. On the other side, the shadows seemed to part, leaving a narrow path that wound upward into a hill where the moonlight fell like silver fire. As they climbed, Alara noticed strange carvings on the trees, symbols she did not recognize, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Kale stopped before one, his golden eyes narrowing. "These are wards," he said slowly. "They were not made by this forest, but by the curse that holds me." Alara traced the glowing symbols with her fingers. "A curse?" she asked softly. "What happened to you? Who did this?" Kale hesitated, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Memories flashed in his eyes, faces of betrayal, voices of those he had once trusted, a throne of gold and stone now broken. "I was a king," he said finally, "a ruler of this land, and I was betrayed. The curse, it stripped me of my form, my strength, my kingdom. I became what you see." Alara's chest tightened. She felt the weight of his pain, centuries of it, condensed into the shadowed figure before her. "You're still a king," she said gently. "Not just in memory, but in here," she added, placing her hand over his chest. "Your heart, your courage, that is what makes a king." Kale's golden eyes softened, and for the first time he lowered his head to rest near her shoulder. The light beneath her hand flared briefly, as if acknowledging her words or perhaps her belief in him. The forest seemed to pause, listening almost in reverence. But peace did not last long. From deeper in the woods came a sound, a low, echoing hum, vibrating through the roots and stones. Shadows moved in shapes unnatural and terrible, circling them like predators. The forest itself seemed to rise against them. Alara's pulse quickened, but she did not step back. She met Kale's gaze. "We've faced danger before," she said. "We can face it again, together." Kale growled, a sound of both warning and agreement. He stepped forward, moving with a precision that belied his monstrous form. The shadows advanced, taking form as creatures of smoke and darkness, their eyes glowing red, their movements unnatural. Alara felt the golden light beneath her hand pulse violently as the creatures lunged. Kale met them with controlled power, not blindly, but with calculated strikes, scattering them like leaves in a storm. Yet one of the creatures struck too close, a shadowy hand brushing Alara's shoulder. She gasped, and the forest shivered at the contact. Kale's eyes flared, and he let out a roar that shook the canopy above. The creatures faltered, then retreated into the shadows, dissolving as the light strengthened around them. Alara reached up, touching his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath the fur. "You saved me again," she whispered. Kale's gaze met hers, a mixture of something fierce and something tender. For the first time, he allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible nod. He was beginning to trust not only her, but himself again. As they continued up the hill, the forest opened into a clearing unlike any other. At the center was a stone altar, covered in moss and runes glowing faintly in gold. Kale approached it cautiously, sniffing the air, muscles tense. This is the source," he murmured. "The heart of the curse." Alara stepped closer, her fingers brushing the glowing runes. They pulsed under her touch, and she felt a wave of energy ripple through her. "It's alive," she whispered, "like it's waiting for something." Kale's eyes narrowed. "It is waiting for someone strong enough to confront it, and someone brave enough to believe." Alara turned to him. "Then we will face it, together." The forest seemed to respond, the wind whispering through the trees like voices in a cathedral. Shadows twisted and shifted around the clearing, forming a mirror-like surface on the altar. In its reflection, Kale's monstrous form flickered, and for a moment, Alara saw him as he once had been. Strong, regal, commanding, the Alpha King of Valder. Kale stiffened, his claws digging into the earth. Memories of betrayal, of loss, of exile washed over him. He growled, shaking his head, fighting the darkness within. I cannot," he whispered. "I am not what I was." Alara placed both hands on his chest, pressing lightly. "You are," she said softly, "not because of what you were, but because of what you still are. Brave, strong, kind, and willing to fight. That is what makes a king." The golden light beneath her hand flared brighter, illuminating the clearing. The shadowed reflection of Kale shifted, struggling against the light, against her touch. He trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of centuries of sorrow. And then, slowly, the light began to dissolve the darkness, revealing his true form beneath the monster. He gasped, a sound almost human, almost raw with emotion. "Alara, you," she held his gaze. "I see you," she said, "all of you, and I will not leave." For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Kale allowed himself to feel hope. The shadow of the curse recoiled, hissing, twisting, trying to reclaim him. But the bond between them, the connection she had forged through trust and courage, pushed it back. The forest shuddered. The trees groaned, and the wind howled like a chorus of lost souls. And then, as if conceding defeat for the moment, the shadows retreated into the depths, leaving Kale and Alara standing in the silver light of the moon. Kale sank to the ground beside her, breathing heavily, golden eyes glinting with emotion. "You saved me," he whispered, voice trembling. "You saw me when no one else could." Alara reached out, brushing her fingers against his cheek. "I believe in you," she said simply, "and I always will." Kale's gaze softened, and he rested his massive head near her shoulder. The golden light pulsed gently, the forest calm around them, at least for now. He had begun to remember himself, to reclaim the Alpha King beneath the monster. And she had begun to reclaim her own strength, her courage, her place in a world that had cast her out. But the forest never forgets. Deep in the shadows, something older than time stirred. A presence waiting, patient, cunning. The trials were not over. They had survived this test, yes, but greater challenges awaited, challenges that would force Kale to confront his past fully, and Alara to discover the depth of her own courage. Together, they rose, side by side, ready to face whatever came next. And as the moonlight washed over them, the bond between rejected Omega and cursed Alpha burned brighter than any shadow the forest could throw at them. The forest was alive with a pulse that seemed older than time. Shadows shifted, twisting along the trunks and underbrush, as though they had been waiting centuries for this moment. Alara held Kale's massive hand, her fingers brushing against his golden fur. The light beneath her touch had grown steady and strong, a quiet heartbeat that matched his own. Kale's golden eyes scanned the darkness, alert and wary. The trials of the forest had tested him in body, mind, and soul, but now the final test approached, the moment he had feared for centuries. His past, his curse, and the true power that had been stolen from him all waited in the heart of the woods. Alara looked up at him. "We've come this far," she said softly. "We face it together no matter what." Kale's growl was low, almost reverent. "You have given me courage I thought I had lost," he admitted. "If I fail, I do not want to fail alone." The path ahead opened into a vast clearing. At its center stood a stone pedestal, carved with ancient runes glowing faintly in a golden light that seemed to radiate outward. Around it, the shadows coalesced into shapes that twisted and shifted, forming a dark mirror of Kale's own monstrous form. The reflection hissed, a dark echo of his anger, betrayal, and despair. This is the source of my curse," Kale said, voice trembling. "All my regrets, all my anger, all my pain, it lives here. I must face it alone." Alara stepped closer, placing both hands on his chest. "No, you do not face it alone. I see you, Kale, not the monster, not the king you once were, but all of you. And I will not leave, not now, not ever." Kale's eyes softened. The golden light beneath her hands flared, washing over both of them. The shadowed mirror quivered and the dark reflection of Kale hissed, writhing in defiance. It lunged forward, a surge of darkness, and Kale roared, stepping in front of Alara. "I will not be your prisoner," he shouted. The words carried strength, authority, and the memory of the king he had been. "I am Kale. I am Alpha. I am more than this curse." The dark reflection recoiled, a scream echoing through the clearing. The forest trembled as if responding to the truth in his declaration. Alara held him steady, her hands warm and steady against his chest. "You are more than you believe," she said, "and I believe in you. That is enough." Golden light burst from beneath her hands, spreading like wildfire over Kale's body. The shadow shrieked, recoiling, and then shattered into countless shards that scattered into the mist. The monstrous form that had haunted him for centuries dissolved, leaving the true Kale standing in the clearing. His fur receded, his massive claws reshaped into hands, and the strength and presence of the Alpha King returned. Kale fell to his knees, gasping, human once more but carrying the weight of centuries in his eyes. Alara knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. "The curse, it's gone." Kale looked at her, awe and gratitude mingling in his golden eyes. You saved me," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "No one has ever seen me as you do." Alara smiled, though tears gleamed in her eyes. "Because I see the truth. You are not just a king. You are a man who has suffered, who has survived, and who can rise again. And you are more than your crown. You are my companion, my protector, my friend." Kale's lips curved into the faintest smile, a rare softness in a man who had carried so much pain. "Friend," he repeated, the word tasting like hope. Then he looked around the clearing. "And the kingdom?" Alara followed his gaze. Beyond the forest, the ruins of Valder lay faint in the early dawn. The palace, broken and overgrown, the streets silent, waiting for the return of a ruler. Kale rose, standing tall, regal, yet tempered by centuries of humility and grief. The Alpha King was back, but not unscarred. He had learned patience, compassion, and the value of trust. "We should return," Alara said gently. "The kingdom needs you." Kale nodded, his gaze lingering on the forest. "The forest has given me life, but the kingdom is my duty. And now I have someone to guide me, not just to power but to justice." Together, they walked out of the forest. Each step was careful, deliberate, as though the earth itself had learned to trust Kale's return. Birds began to sing in the trees, the mist lifted, and the first rays of sunlight touched the broken walls of the kingdom. It was a scene both beautiful and sorrowful, a kingdom waiting for redemption. When the nobles saw Kale and Alara approaching, their surprise turned quickly to fear. They had expected the monster to die, the rejected Omega to vanish, but instead the king returned, alive, strong, and with an aura of authority they could not deny. "Kale," one noble began, bowing stiffly. We thought," Kale raised a hand, golden eyes glinting. "You thought I would remain broken. You thought that fear and betrayal could define me. You were wrong." Alara stood beside him, small but unwavering. "And you thought you could dismiss me," she said calmly, "but I am here. I am not weak. I am not forgotten. And together we will restore what was lost." The nobles shifted uneasily. Some bowed, recognizing authority they could not challenge. Others remained silent, hiding fear behind pride. Kale's gaze swept over them, commanding yet tempered by wisdom. "The kingdom will rise, not by fear, but by justice, by compassion, and by courage." Alara reached for his hand, and Kale took it, golden fingers wrapping around hers. The bond they had forged in the forest, through danger and darkness, was unbroken and stronger than ever. It was not just trust. It was love, quiet, patient, and transformative. They moved together through the palace ruins, restoring order where chaos had reigned. Kale did not rule as a tyrant but as a guide, tempered by years of reflection and the knowledge of what it meant to be human, to be vulnerable, and to be saved by someone else's compassion. Alara's presence beside him was not just comfort. It was a reminder that strength could come from empathy, that courage could be quiet, that love could be a force greater than fear. She had touched him, healed him, and in doing so had also healed herself. She was no longer the rejected Omega. She was the light that returned a king to his throne. As the days passed, the kingdom began to recover. The people, seeing the Alpha King restored, rallied with hope. The forests that had once been feared were now respected, for they had given the King and the Omega a chance to reclaim what had been lost. And in every glance, every touch between Kale and Alara, the kingdom saw a story not of conquest, but of trust, courage, and redemption. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the kingdom in shades of gold and crimson, Kale and Alara stood together on a balcony overlooking the city. The wind brushed through their hair, carrying scents of wildflowers and moss, of life returning to the land. Kale turned to her, his golden eyes steady and warm. "You changed me, Alara. More than the forest, more than any curse. You reminded me of what it means to be human, to feel, to care." Alara smiled softly. "And you reminded me that even those who are broken can rise again if someone believes in them." Kale lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. "I promise," he said quietly, "I will protect you, guide you, and stand with you. Not because you are my companion, but because you are my equal. My heart is yours as much as my kingdom." Tears gleamed in her eyes, but she smiled, the warmth of hope and love radiating from her. "And I will stand with you, Kale, always." From the forest beyond, a soft rustle of leaves reminded them that the world was never completely free of danger. But they no longer feared it. Together, they had faced darkness, conquered the curse, and reclaimed the light. The bond between Omega and Alpha was unshakable, forged in the fires of trial, strengthened by trust, and tempered by love. And as the night settled over Valder, the stars shining like scattered gems above, Alara and Kale stood together, rulers of a kingdom and of their own hearts. They had survived exile, shadows, and the weight of ancient curses. They had found strength not in power alone, but in each other. The kingdom had been restored, the curse broken, and the love between a rejected Omega and the returned Alpha King became legend. an eternal story whispered in the winds of Valder, a tale of courage, hope, and redemption that would live beyond them, long after the forest had receded into memory.